Hi, and welcome to this week's Wu Wei Wisdom Life Lessons teaching. It's great to be back with you all. This week we are talking all about the insecure inner child. Now, were you raised in a dysfunctional, unstable, or unsafe childhood environment? Many of our clients and supporters come to us because of traumatic childhood experiences, which mean that their inner child is now always on emotional high alert and feels unsafe and vulnerable at all times. Now, even though their authentic adult self knows that this is not a healthy or helpful way of perceiving the world, the inner child still desperately craves security and protection in all life situations. And so because of this, they compromise their life choices and it affects their relationships and their ability to flourish and grow. So what's going on here with the inner child? And how can we work with our inner child to make it feel more secure and safe? Well, in this week's teaching, we answer these questions. Okay, David, so let's begin with trying to really understand what's happening with our inner child. If, as a child, we experienced insecurity, unstable situations, dysfunctionality, that was a real thing.
Yes.
But now, as an adult, our inner child is perceiving everything to be insecure, unstable, scary. What's actually happening here with the inner child?
So this is such a great question because it allows us to go back right to the beginning again, 101. And it's always worth doing these videos to step through little step by little step. Now, this process is very important, these small steps, because what happens to us is we kind of jumble everything up together and we don't separate the steps that are going on here. So let me start off with the basic teaching. You hear me say it on nearly every video, so let me repeat it. You are the creator of your emotions. You are not the victim. And what I find with my clients is they've heard the videos, they want to work with me, they understand the concept and they even agree with the concept, but there's a part of their mind that we would like to call the inner child. Now, you may want to call it your ego, your alter ego, your emotional mind. I'm not worried with any of those. I think the inner child label is a better label. So even though they maturely agree with that statement, there's a part of their mind that I'm calling the inner child does not agree. And so they have this internal conflict. And as you said in the introduction, when it becomes about emotional issues, which most of our life is about emotional issues, the mature mind is not in control. The part that we're calling the inner child is in control.
And you started off by saying there, David, that you want to kind of clear the confusion, because when we have the belief that the world is a safe place, everyone might harm us or anyone might harm us, or I don't want to try something new because it's unsafe or I might feel vulnerable, that puts us on emotional high alert. And that emotional high alert, that state of extreme emotions and almost like panic, that does create confusion, because then our total focus is always, oh, how do I get rid of these emotions? So we never focus on the real cause. So my question is, when we were young, if we actually experienced possibly an unsafe, abusive situation, that was a real tangible situation. But the inner child is now, our inner child can often perceive, or I guess anticipate is probably a better word, that lots of new people, new situations, things are going to go wrong. This is going to be bad. I'm exposing myself here. I'm going to make myself vulnerable here. It's like we're still creating an environment. Look, I guess we're like recreating our childhood environment. Why would the inner child do that?
Because it's even more of a micro step than you just explained. Because when you're a child, you did not create the circumstances, the dysfunctionality. You did not create that, but you did create the emotional feeling. Now, the inner child has kind of merged those two together. So it doesn't see the difference between the external situation and the internal emotional feelings. Those two become one. So the inner child does not believe that they are creating the emotion. They believe that the circumstances or the person is creating the emotion. And then it's totally understandable that the inner child believes there is something out there called emotional protection or emotional safety. Now, you can test this for yourself and see whether this life lesson is relevant to you. Ask yourself, truly, honestly, do you believe in the concept of emotional safety or emotional protection? Now, if you answer that yes, then you cannot believe that you create your emotions. Because on a very simplistic level, how can you be safe from emotions that you have created? It makes a nonsensical argument. You can be safe from and try and keep yourself protected from unsafe situations or people, but not from emotions. And so you see how you've merged the two together. And that creates, this is what I call a 101, a fundamental fork. Remember in the videos, I talk about a fork in the track. If you confuse those two together, you go on the wrong fork. So there is nothing called emotional safety or emotional protection if you truly 100% believe that you create your emotions.
But by contrast, there is such a thing as physical safety and physical protection. So we're not denying that. So I want to break.
Can I just say on that though, if you do not get that fundamental first step correct, then it's much more difficult and challenging for you to identify situations and people that you should be careful with in those circumstances.
Yeah, because it's almost like if you're looking at life or looking at situations or looking at new people you meet through the lens of the inner child's perception or faulty perception of believing that everything is emotionally unsafe and that I need to be emotionally protected, that you will, it's like a blanket thing across everything. So you become less discerning, as you say. First of all, you don't pick up, you don't acknowledge situations and people who are perfectly okay, perfectly authentic, being perfectly truthful. And these are people and situations that would help me flourish and grow. But equally, because you're always on this high alert, you become less sensitized, ironically, to situations or people who are inauthentic, who are potentially harmful in some way.
Can I just focus for a moment before we move on this point? Because this is the point. This micro step is very important. Let's put it into a mundane situation, your career. So if you believe that you have to be emotionally safe or emotionally protected, it's going to be much more difficult for you to change jobs, to take another career path, to accept a promotion. You'll be more concerned about what other people think about you, what your boss thinks about you, how your work is, trying to be perfect. Can you see from that very slight micro step how it kind of develops and balloons out into everything that, well, I can't get this job right because I've got to be emotionally protected rather than focusing on the job. So that is why I would call it a really basic understanding that you are the creator of your emotions. You are not the victim. Therefore, if you create your emotions, the idea of being emotionally safe doesn't make sense. How can you be emotionally safe or protected from something that you're creating?
So I want to go back on this equation. You said there's like the two parts. So when we're a child, we have the first part is we have the external environment, the external experience that we have no control over, which may be dysfunctional, energetically unbalanced, unsafe, unpredictable.
Yes.
That's the truth. That's the reality.
And that may be abuse in some form, and that may be really unfair criticism, unfair judgments. That could be anything.
Yeah. And so then quite naturally, quite rightly as a child, we then have our internal response. So that's then the other piece in this two-part equation.
Yes.
And that quite natural response as a child, particularly because we're a young child, we're dependent on other people, we're not emotionally mature, we're not able to look after ourselves.
Absolutely.
We experience extreme red light emotions, uncomfortable and painful emotions that we label now as an adult. I was vulnerable, I was unsafe, I was scared, I was fearful, etc., etc.
Yes.
Now, so that's the two-part equation as a child. Now, because the experience was so traumatic, so intense, so much so the child says quite rightly, I never want to experience those red light emotions again. And as you say, the child believes the red light emotions come part and parcel with the external situation. They don't appreciate they're creating them themselves.
And I think it's even a little bit more basic than that. They believe that the emotion came externally.
And attack them.
In
the same way that the dysfunctional situation may be physically affecting them in some way.
That's right. And when they merge those two together, then they are not believing that they create the emotional feeling. They believe that other people or external situations create the emotional feeling. And then you see they're at the fork now. Immediately, you're now on the defensive. You are now on avoidance. You are now on ducking out. You are now not thinking about taking on a new job, meeting a new person, trying a new situation. You're immediately on the defensive. The doors have closed. And that's why this 101 teaching is so important. And as I say, even when the clients I work with, they intellectually say, yes, I know that, but I know they don't believe it. So when that part of their mind tells them when they're older, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, about emotional protection, they just accept it. I need to be emotionally and so they're not working from their mature mind, they're working from the inner child.
But I guess from childhood, David, if that experience was such an upheaval, so traumatic. In reality, it was for the child because we were a young, impressionable child that we was dependent on other people. And quite often those people were not helping us. They may have been the ones that were creating the situation. We create that vow, or almost that we never want to experience that again. And so what now as an adult, that vow, that belief is carried forward, and we, rather than the real situation we experience as a child, so this first part of the equation, our inner child is now, I guess, constantly on the lookout for possibilities which don't necessarily exist. It's almost using its creative imagination to imagine external situations which are going to attack it, make it vulnerable, make it feel really unsafe and insecure, and create those red light emotions again. And so in the imagining, the inner child is creating the red light emotions.
Exactly. So the inner child will project on, and almost like the enemy at the door, will see every situation as a potential of creating a red light, because they do not believe that they are creating it. They believe that other people are creating it. And this simple teaching is life-changing because, as Alex has said, you've kind of merged the two equations together as one. So instead of looking at your childhood, when I work with my clients, my goodness, some of the circumstances that they've been through, some of the dysfunctionality never ceases to amaze me. Yet the truth of the situation is, you did come through. you did manage to go through that. And that's when clients tell me they can't cope. It's very difficult for me not to laugh because they are amazing copers. You've always coped. And that's why I dislike the word victim. I prefer the word victorious. You should be so proud of yourself if your childhood has been dysfunctional, as we're describing, if you've been highly criticized or abused verbally, mentally, or sexually, and you've come through that. My goodness, that shows me the strength of your Shen, your spirituality, your true character. And you are victorious. You are not a victim. And if you keep that childlike way of view, as Alex has explained, that perception, that filter of the universe, then you get trapped. And this is why you experience the feelings of being trapped, of being blocked, of not living and flourishing that we talk about in these videos, wanting you to be in your flow, to flourish, to be the best that you can be, to be able to deal with all of the adversities that come your way because you're looking at life through the wrong filter.
And do you think, David, in terms of the coping, I take your point that we really always do ourselves a disservice and think we dismiss the fact that many of our clients and supporters have been through some terrible things in their childhood, and yet they are still thriving and surviving. But do you think that part of the coping or the coping strategy is this thing we're talking about now, that this default, if you like, assumption that we've got to protect ourselves, that actually we've coped in many ways, in many practical ways, but actually one of the coping, I guess, psychological coping strategies of that part of our mind, the inner child, is that this default assumption that we've got to protect ourselves, that the world's out to get us, that people are out to get us, that the world is a dangerous place. That form of coping strategy is not healthy. That's kind of what we're talking about now.
So what I would say, I would go even further than you just mentioned. I do not think the idea of keeping yourself emotionally protected has ever helped you. Not once. It's almost like you've been living your life and pulling along. I often, when I'm working with my clients, this is the image that I get energetically. They're living their life, they're trying really hard, they're really hard workers, very determined, but it's almost like they're pulling a chain with a big anchor behind them. And every step is like a drudgery. Every step takes twice as much effort that it should. This is why they complain of tiredness, of ill health, of striving and not being able to thrive, because they're working from this misunderstanding. Well, I prefer to call a lie. It's a lie. You do not have to be emotionally protected from your own emotions. It's a nonsense. If you think about it, if you believe that you create the emotion, and then you say, well, I'm going to create this emotion, and then I've got to protect myself from the emotion that you've created, you're almost having to take not even 2 steps, but 10 steps more than anybody else has to take. And yet, as you said, and I've witnessed, my clients have still managed to live their life and be successful. Imagine what it would be like if you dropped the anchor and the chain. Now you would be able to walk lighter. I call it, the Taoists say, walk in fresh snow. You'll be able to walk your path with freedom, with that weight lifted off your shoulder. You suddenly start not even to look better, to think better, to sleep better, to eat better, to have more energy, because now you're in your flow. This is the whole principle of Wu Wei, living in your flow, being victorious, living to your true potential. All of our videos are based on this life lesson. Do not hold yourself down and put weights behind you and on your shoulders that don't need to be there, because those childhood experiences you've already been victorious. Don't carry them into your life and put them in front of you. It's almost like I've gone through it, and now I'm going to put it in front of me and go through it again and go through it again and go through it again.
Yeah, well, it's definitely like this baggage that you're carrying with you, because in a way that many of our clients who have experienced dysfunctional childhoods, as a child, it forced them to begin to try and think for themselves, to strategize for themselves, to be creative and resourceful in terms of how do I get myself out of this situation? How do I protect myself from this real problem? And that it's kind of honed their creativeness and their resourcefulness. And you know, many of our clients who come to us are very highly successful entrepreneurs and business owners.
Absolutely.
And their childhood environment has made them that creative, resourceful person, but yet they still are, I guess, channeling those positive qualities in the wrong direction, because the motivation comes from wanting to protect themselves, to wanting to future-proof, wanting to make sure they've got an extra large amount of money because they think they're going to lose it all at some point, or something's going to go wrong. So it's a kind of faulty motivation, even though they're successful.
You're absolutely right. In some parts of their lives, this is what they don't understand. In some parts of their life, they are so successful. And then in other parts, what they would class the important parts, their self-image, the way they look after themselves, the way they think about themselves, their emotional lives, they are totally unsuccessful. And remember, on many videos, we've been talking about the pendulum, and you see the emotional pendulum in full force here, that one part of the life, you will see their determination, their resourcefulness. I love the word resilience. They will be totally resilient in one part of their life, but in the other part of their life, totally the opposite, defensive, victim mode, building up barriers, trying to protect themselves, worrying about what other people think about them, caring, trying to people please, trying to do this, going from one relationship to another, never being fully satisfied in their own life. Yet on the other side, they're great mothers, they're great fathers, they're great employees, they're great at building companies, being a millionaire, making money. They're great at that. And here's the idea of the emotional pendulum, swinging from one extreme to the other. And our teaching is we want that pendulum to come into the middle. That's where the power lies, that in that authenticity, what I call the truth, the honesty, the integrity, in Wu Wei, that flow, that middle way of the pendulum. Imagine in your mind this pendulum swinging, either getting stuck in one or stuck in the other, or for a lot of my clients, swinging violently between the two extremes instead of bringing it into the center.
Yeah, and that thing you say about people who may be very successful in their career, very confident, very bold, very yangy, very outgoing, and yet hold tremendous, say, insecurities in terms of their personal life or their relationships. Yep. It's almost like their inner child belief that their childhood experiences create the determination, the creativity, the ability to succeed, say, in their business life. But the underlying inner child belief that the world's an unsafe place, people are out to get them, not to trust your partners, that it's like you can't hide it. It has to come out. You can't hide the energy of that faulty belief. It has to come out somewhere. So they manage to not let it escape in their career or their business life, but the faulty belief manifests in their relationships or their personal life or their family life.
So this manifests a lot with a lot of my clients, and my clients who are watching in will smile because we're talking about what I call the dual belief system. They will develop a dual belief system and they'll hop quite happily from one belief to another. And this is why it's so difficult and complicated to pin it down, because on one moment you're talking to the mature mind, who's very logical, very determined, very resilient, and then almost with a blink of an eye, you're talking to an inner child. And It's very hard, and that's part of when I'm working with a client, to understand that this dual belief system shows you that there is part of your life where the adult part of you, the rational part of you, is not in control. You have a little 6-7-year-old with their hands on the steering wheel, guiding your life. And you almost, and this is a very strong word, but you almost emotionally surrender to that part of your mind. Because what they're saying to you, there is some part of you that agrees with. And this subject today, emotional protection, this is normally the one that you will agree with. There is such a thing called emotional safety and emotional protection. And I'm saying the opposite. There is no such thing as emotional protection or safety if you believe that you create the emotion.
But if we buy into the truth as you present it, that we are creating the emotion. So if we feel insecure, if we feel vulnerable, if we feel scared or apprehensive, they are labels for descriptions of physiological, emotional experiences we experience in our body.
Yes.
You're saying we are creating those
because
of our perception of the world.
Yes.
And although when we were a child, the external situation was, in reality, it was threatening, it was unstable, it was abusive, it was dysfunctional.
Yes.
A lot of the time we are imagining people, situations to be threatening, unstable, abusive, when in reality they are not.
Or they could be, but then if you are approaching them as a 6-year-old, then you're not dealing with that situation correctly or authentically or with integrity.
Yeah.
You're not dealing with it as an adult now. You're going into that relationship, and it might be going and doing your yearly review with a boss, say, for instance. I'm just trying to give a practical example. Instead of walking in that office as a mature, intelligent person with all your facts right at your hand, and you sit down and you have that discussion, there's a part of you is like a 6-7-year-old child being scared of being criticized, being told off, being found out. And again, if this is you, you see the dual belief system. So the adult part of you almost surrenders to the inner child. And then instead of sitting in front of your boss as who you really are, this amazing person, this awesome person, you're sitting there inside. They don't see it, but you and I know. You're almost quaking. Your palms are sweaty. You've got tremendous butterflies. Your speech stutters. Your mind's whizzing around. And this is the inner child that's taking over. And this starts from that basic teaching, who creates your emotions. Because if you still believe that you can be emotionally protected or emotionally safe, then you're not in control. The inner child is in control.
So to use that situation, we're in going for a job interview. The dual belief system in this situation is the authentic adult part of us knows, I've got the skills here. I'm capable of doing this job. There may be things to learn, but I'm a quick learner. You know, I'm a good candidate for this job. But the other half of the belief system, the inner child's belief system, is I'm not good enough. I'm not going to be able to cope with this. They're going to find me out. They're going to criticize me. They're going to judge me. They're going to think I'm not good enough.
They're going to ask a question, I can't answer it. Then I'll be embarrassed. They're out to get me. There's going to be somebody better than me. I saw somebody in the reception. They look far more experienced than me. I'm going to fail. And so you have this dialogue running all of the time. This is just in that situation, but this applies to all situations.
Yeah, because I can see how you could apply that to, relationship situations, personal health situations. And so if, for example, as a child, we came from a dysfunctional or abusive environment where we were constantly criticized, constantly judged, either verbally, emotionally, physically treated very badly by people who we saw as our elders, then we have created, that's where the inner child belief comes in, that we're now transposing onto this adult situation where we're going for a job interview, where the boss is going to interview us or whatever. So we're recreating, we're We don't know they're going to judge us. We don't know they're going to criticize us. We don't know that we're not good enough. In fact, all the evidence as our authentic adult self is showing that actually that's not the case. But our inner child is predicting that this is going to go badly. This is going to go wrong. I might as well get out of here now before I've even sat down with them. I've written off this exercise completely.
So let's focus on that example that you just said. So let's say it was true, as Alex has just said, that you were unjustly, unfairly, heavily criticized and judged as a child. Let's say that that's true. Now, that in you created so much negative feelings that we call red light feelings. And what you've done is you've merged those two together. Instead of looking at the situation that I do when I work with my clients, let's say that's true. Let's say your father, heavily criticized. You could never please him. Didn't matter what you did. If you ripped out your heart and gave it to him, he'd complain it was too red. So you'd never win. Let's say all that's true. But then, rather than dealing with that as an independent incident that you have come through, well done, you have coped. This is why I always laugh when people say I can't cope. You have coped with a dysfunctional father. You have come through that situation. What we do, we confuse and merge and muddy the waters and bring in the emotion. So we don't see it as two separate things. We don't see it as a child quite rightly trying to please their father, trying to do unjustly how unjustly their father is treating them. We merge it together and we get confused. So again, if this is you, let me say the technique I teach my students and my clients. Imagine this is you, and imagine your 6-year-old nephew came to you and they told you all the unfairness, all the injustice of how their father was treating them. Would you look into that 6-year-old child and say, well, that's your fault. It's because you can't cope. That's your fault. It's because you're not good enough. That's your fault because you must be unlovable. And my clients laugh at me. They say, of course I wouldn't. That would be a ridiculous thing to say. And I say, pause. Because that's exactly what you're saying to yourself. And they say, no, it's different. It's no different. You've confused your emotion. And so that little child that you were, that was creating the emotions quite correctly for a child, has been stuck, and that's stuck in your mind. And the way you deal with that is to separate the incident from the emotion.
So
then you can address the incident.
I guess quite rightly, when we were a young child, we couldn't reflect on the situation and then say, oh, well, actually, the problem lies with my father and his issues, his emotional imbalances. It's got nothing to do with me. Of course, as a young child, we couldn't do that. But what you're saying now, in order to break free from this constant inner child assuming that we're unsafe, that we're vulnerable, we have to sit down with ourselves, with our inner child, that part of our mind, and go back to those original childhood incidences and reflect on them now as the mature adult.
And that's what we call in our model the golden thread.
Yeah.
So you start with an emotion and you reverse engineer it. Why did I create that emotion? Why? And you go down to the core belief, the core understanding, or the misunderstanding. And so for a lot of my clients, they will, when we've done that work, and it's very complicated work to do. You can do it as on your own. Of course you can. And that's why we do these videos, to encourage you to do it on your own. But it's very complicated. But a lot of my clients is when I work with them, and it can be very intense when you're going through those emotional barriers. It's almost like layers of an onion. You're going down to the core. You're reverse engineering to the core. And say we get down to the core on the example that you've used. Yes, my father was hypercritical. I could never please my father. Then the question is for you, is that your fault or is that his fault? And you see now you come very childlike because the child likes to go black, white, yes, no, who's to blame, who's not to blame. And it's a very childlike way of looking at a very emotional, complicated situation. As Alex said, it could be that your father had a dysfunctionality in child rearing. And you'll kind of know that because look at his father, look at your grandparents, and you'll kind of see this type of technique coming down the line. And I want to say thank you for watching these videos because now you can stop this traveling down the line. You can stop it now. And a lot of my clients will say, oh, no, David, I would never do that to my children. Never do it to my children. Now the pendulum, you see. I do the opposite. And I say, well, why don't you do that to yourself? And they go, I never thought about it. I wouldn't treat my physical children like that. And that's exactly why I love the analogy and the metaphor of the inner child. Because I want you to consider that you have another child that I would call your spiritual child. And it's you. It's you when you were about 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, desperately looking for a parent, desperately looking for good guidance, desperately looking for emotional education. And now you have to be the spiritual parent, the spiritual father or the spiritual mother, and you have to parent yourself. And this is why we do these lessons. You have to parent yourself in Wu Wei in finding the balance. We're not sitting here and saying, there's no problems in life. You'll never find a bad boss. Oh, you'll always get your interview. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying if you go for the interview in Wu Wei, you're more likely to get the job. Does that mean you'll always get the job? No, of course you won't. But if you don't get the job, then you can assess it correctly.
So I guess this reparenting, one of the first things we can do, as you said, is reverse engineer using the golden thread process from the red light emotions that we are getting because of an anticipation of a situation or a person that we're going to encounter or put ourselves in as an adult. We can go back from the emotions, question the thinking, and get back to the core belief, which perhaps, as you say in the example, is, I'm not good enough. Why are you not good enough? Well, because my father criticised me. And teach the child that that's not you, that was them. That's not you. The problem's not with you, it's with the person, it's with the external situation. And so the second thing we can do in the reparenting is what you've kind of alluded to just then, is about teaching the child that things will not always go the way they want it to go. Things will go wrong. People could be imbalanced. We may encounter people who are imbalanced in life. And because I guess the child wants everything to be safe, everything to be rosy, no problems to ever exist. So the second thing we need to work with our inner child on is this moving from this utopian Disneyland view of life that the inner child really, really wants to create and grounding it in a reality where it accepts that life is unpredictable. Things change. We can't predict everything. We certainly can't control everything, but that we have to kind of trust ourselves that we can cope.
And I absolutely agree with you, Alex. And I think if you're being a spiritual parent to yourself, to that inner child within your mind, you would want to teach them how to deal with the situations that Alex had just mentioned. But go back to what we said 10 minutes ago. One of your qualities are resilience, determination, maybe willfulness, maybe even stubbornness. Now, instead of using it in the negative, what you can teach yourself is to use it in the positive. So again, using the analogy that we've been using, going in for an interview, now you can walk into that interview not as a dual personality, not dragging your inner child along with you, going, no, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do this. Walking in as one, in Wu Wei. So there may be some difficult questions, but if you're calm, if you're focused, if you're in your flow, if you're flourishing, then you'll answer those questions correctly. And you'll be able to go through that situation or any other situation with that wu-wei flow and ease. And this is the life lesson. It all goes back to understanding that are you the creator of your emotions? Every emotion in your body, all the red light emotions we focus on because they are very important. That's what brings clients to us: anxiety, depression, anger, regret, all of that stuff. But also the green light emotions, confidence. We're talking about an interview. The number one emotion to generate going into that interview room is confidence. It's a feeling. It's a feeling. That's what it is. Who generates the feeling? They don't generate the feeling. You generate the feeling. Confidence, bliss, happiness, and perhaps the most important one, we've done several videos on, love. Love is an emotional feeling, and so therefore you create it. So when you can go back and you can emotionally educate your child, rather than looking outside externally for validation, approval, value, he or she can look internally to you and you become one. And that's the teaching of Wu Wei and oneness. And that's the life lesson, is to go down and to find where you have the misalignments. That's what the golden thread does, reverse engineers until the red light is telling you you've got a misalignment. The next job is to find out what the misalignment is, and then find the emotion in the education to repair that misalignment.
And that teaching of our inner child that we are the creators of our emotions is probably the most powerful exercise you can do with your inner child, particularly in this sort of situation.
I think so. It's very difficult to be precise because everyone listening to us, we're very grateful. We have thousands of people watching our videos. Their situations are always slightly different and unique to them, which they should be. But I think from all of my teaching, doing this for over 40 years, there are two basic core teachings we say on all the videos. You are the creator of your emotions, not the victim, and you control your mind. Your mind does not control you. So the inner child does not control you unless you allow them to control you. And that's why, what is that higher source that's doing that? And that's what in our teaching, we call Shen, your spirituality. You may call it your higher self, your intuition. Words can confuse, but there is a part of you that is non-physical, but it's the one in control. And that's what I would call your Shen or your spirituality.
And the idea being that inspirational, that spiritual, authentic side of ourselves is to be the parent to the child, and that together in the oneness we can authentically tackle and deal with any situations that life puts in front of us.
Yeah. So if you use the interview analogy, just imagine you've got your door on. You got your hand on the handle of the door. There's 8 people behind that door that's going to ask you questions for an hour, as whether you're going to have this job or not. And just pause for a second now with me. Now, would you want to open that door with an inner child screaming and shouting and wanting to drag you out? Or do you want to walk in that door in your Shen natural spirit? Absolutely showing confidence. So when you sit down, the 8 people are just in awe as you sit down there confidently, smiling, happy, ready to answer their questions, ready to show them how much you know about this career, this job, these circumstances. Think about those two extremes, and that's what we're talking about, because I want you to be in your Shen. I want you to be authentic. I want you to have integrity. I want you to live in your truth. And here's the life lesson here. And that's why the idea of emotional safety is so confusing and so misleading that it does not exist.
And it blocks off the flow of energy in any situation we encounter, or any relationship with a new person we might encounter, or anything we want to try in our life. If our focus is only on the inner child's narrative of wanting certainty, wanting positive outcomes, wanting things to be safe and okay and as we expected, then we are ignoring the Shen narrative, which is, this is a new experience. Let's see where this goes. Let's just, this interview, let's just enjoy the experience of the interview, being able to share my knowledge with the people who are going to ask me questions. Let's just enjoy the experience of doing the interview. Let's not focus so much on the outcome.
Well, just play along with that experiment now. Put yourself in this interview chair and a half circle of 8 people ready to ask you questions. Now play in your mind, I have to be emotionally safe, or I have to be open. Which is the best one for you? And this is the law of attraction then, you see. We've done many videos on law of attraction. Who's gonna give the best interview? The person who's trying to be emotionally safe and worried about what these 8 people think and are thinking about them, or the person that sits there relaxed, open, confident, and is thinking, what other people think of me? It's none of my business. Which one would you rather be? And that choice is yours. And here's the life lesson. That choice is yours. If you can't make that choice, you do the reverse engineering, the golden thread, to find out the core. The core is normally in your childhood, not always, but the majority of the time. It's normally not always about your parents, normally not always about your childhood environment, but that's what you have to clarify, and that's what you have to do, the golden thread, to find out where is this. Where did I go on the wrong track?
Brilliant. Thank you, David. Well, we've done so many teachings which will help support your work on this topic. So we have teachings on reparenting the inner child. We've got another teaching on the emotional safety myth, and on the highly sensitive person, and the emotional pendulum. And I will put links to all those teachings in the show notes. But there's been some really strong life lessons in this particular teaching, David, explaining to the inner child and getting the inner child to really understand that they create the emotions. Yes. They're not the victim of them.
I would say that's the number one.
Then that emotional safety and protection do not exist, and we cannot control the external world, but together in the oneness, we can tackle whatever life throws at us.
We will be victorious.
We will be victorious. And finally, then, to do that deeper reflection work on the origin of the belief that they're unsafe, that they're invulnerable, perhaps going back to that original childhood situation and reframing it.
Exactly.
Brilliant. Well, we really hope you have enjoyed this teaching. Please do comment below, ask us questions. We'd be happy to hear from you. Share it with someone else who you think may also benefit. David works every week with clients all over the world by video call on topics just like this. And if you're interested in learning more about David's sessions, I will put a link so you can learn more about those in the show notes below. And finally, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We produce new videos every week, and we would love to share your journey with you. Bye-bye.